probably the most talked about television show in years. It opens with, "This is a true story." And it tells the story of Richard Gadd and his supposedly dangerous stalker. Didn't take very long for viewers to identify the woman who is depicted in the series as the mad, bad Martha. But the record very quickly, having spoken to the lady in question, Fiona Harvey, discovered that all was not quite as it seemed. In fact, she said, "I'm the victim and I've not been convicted of any crimes as depicted in the show." And this has led, in the past, since April when this show started, this has led to what appears to be a looming court case for $170 million worth of damages. And Fiona Harvey's lawyer, Richard Roth of Roth Law in the States, is here with me now. Richard, welcome, and thank you for taking the time to chat with me.
Hey, thank you, John, for having me.
Now, this is moving apace. Obviously, you filed the lawsuit not very long ago, and I think Netflix had more time if they wanted it before they responded, but they've now moved to try to get the judge to throw your lawsuit in the bin, as it were, and they've come up with a few kind of claims of their own, including the fact that the entire suit is without merit.
Yeah, it's it's funny because the whole story is based on the first screen, which says this is a true story. It doesn't say this is based on a true story. It doesn't say this is inspired by a true story. It doesn't say anything's fictional. It says this is a true story, which is 5 words, which have meaning. Netflix and all the streamers, when they actually put those words on, it goes through legal, it goes through compliance. They want to make sure it's true. And so we sued, and in their motion to dismiss, which was just filed this week, maybe last week, on Friday, I believe, Netflix now is taking the position, well, this really isn't a true story. It's all fictionalized. So they've really, if you will, either you can say tied themselves in knots or shot themselves in the foot, because they're now admitting that it isn't true. And what they're saying is that the story is really not about Fiona. It's a fictional character. And it just goes without saying that that's not what they say in the series. That's not what the series stands for. So they really are tying themselves, I think the best term is tying themselves in tremendous knots.
Well, I've had a look at that document that they submitted to the court in Los Angeles, and it seems to me that they are claiming something called, which a lot of people in the UK won't really know what it is, something called the First Amendment gives them the right to broadcast this show and really doesn't require them to consider Fiona Harvey's feelings on the matter whatsoever.
So it's partially true. The First Amendment allows you to say, in this country, allows you to say pretty much anything to anyone unless you're exciting imminent lawless action. So they have a right to say whatever they want, but let's distinguish that between harming someone. Defamation is you can go ahead and say it, but if you say it and it's false and it's disparaging, you could be liable for damages. And that's the difference. So I could say right now that someone is a criminal. I have a right to say that. But if I'm wrong about it, it's a very different analysis as to whether or not you're entitled to damages for the inappropriate and incorrect statement. And that's where Netflix is trying to blur. They make it a very blurry distinction when it's really not that blurry.
Okay, so a lot of people have formed a view of Fiona Harvey already, partly because of Baby Reindeer and partly because of the publicity that has surrounded the TV show. They've formed a view. And there's a number of people that say, well, there's no smoke without fire. She's obviously sent some of these 41,000 emails that Richard Gadd claims he received. or did he receive them, because he's now saying it's a dramatization? So they're saying, well, you know, she kind of created this, and this is one of the defenses that Netflix have come up with too. She's kind of brought this upon herself.
Yeah, they're saying that, but there's so many problems with what they're saying. Number one is they're even shying away from the 41,000 emails. They said 41,000 emails. If it's a true story, then there should be 41,000. How about 4,000? How about 1,000? We don't think any of those emails exist. So this is Richard Gadd essentially stating things which are fictitious. Number one. Number two is she didn't really bring it upon herself. She started getting death threats. As we know, in our technologically savvy, communication savvy age, it is very easy to find out who it's written about. If they really wanted to not have people find her, they could have disguised her. They didn't have to make it a Scottish woman. Didn't have to make it a heavyset woman. They didn't have to have the same bar that she was in. They didn't have to have the writer be the main character. I mean, he is the other person in the alleged true story. They didn't have to use her text. They didn't have to use her tweets or her Facebook or her emails, but they decided to take everything about her that they claim is true, and then they warped it. They fabricated so much in it. They fabricated not only whether there was a criminal, in fact, 2 criminal convictions, because in the very beginning of the series, if you've seen it, spoiler alert, it says she was in jail for 4.5 years, which is false. The last episode, she pleads guilty to 4 different crimes, which is false. But there's so many things in this story which are just unquestionably false. And so if they wanted to do it the right way, they could have said it's based on a true story, and they could have camouflaged, for lack of a better word, the who Fiona was. They did nothing. And in today's day and age, when there's so much fake news out there, Netflix should be held responsible for its wrongful conduct, which this clearly is.
Well, they're obviously taking your lawsuit seriously. That's the first thing. They've clearly put a lot of work into their defense, whether it contradicts itself or not. They've got a top lawyer involved who, you know, stood up to the Jackson estate in the past, who has represented celebrities in the FTX scandal, the crypto scandal. Are you nervous at all about, you know, this case? Do you feel that it could be thrown out by the judge?
I'm not nervous at all about this case, nor am I nervous about the lawyers. I've been practicing for 40 years. I've gone up against anyone and everyone in the UK and in the US, etc. I don't believe this case will ever be thrown out. I think that Netflix has a big problem. Not only are they switching their tune by now saying it's fictitious, but the other big problem they have is that, as we all know, as anyone who follows the story knows, Benjamin King, who's a senior executive at Netflix, testified in front of Parliament, saying that she was a convicted felon, which is false. It's false testimony. And now there's a letter, which we've just found, from Netflix to Parliament saying the woman depicted in the story was never convicted. So we have Benjamin King saying to Parliament, the woman depicted in the story is not convicted. And we have Richard Gadd saying in a sworn statement to a U.S. federal court judge that there was no woman depicted in this story. It's fictitious. So which one is it? The problem with Netflix, and quite frankly, I'm astounded with such good lawyers, that they are so tying themselves up. There are so many intellectual inconsistencies, and we haven't even begun this case. We're just out of the box, and they already have King saying it's about a person, Gadd saying it's not about a person. The story says it's a true story. Gadd says it's fictional. There's so many there's just so many lies. There's a saying, I think it's Richard Frost, that says, oh, what tangled web we weave if at first we practice to deceive. And that's what's going on here by Netflix. And I think it's very problematic for them.
How does this work in your favor going forward?
So the way it works in our favor is that all of this is leading to the one conclusion, that this wasn't a mistake. It wasn't a mistake that they said it's a true story, not knowing it. It wasn't a mistake that they didn't camouflage Fiona. We believe it was done intentionally, because Netflix is making tens, if not hundreds of millions of dollars from the story. It got 11 Emmy nominations. It's on par to be the most watched series ever on Netflix, over 70 million people. So all of this is leading us to conclude, to a judge and a jury if we need to, that Netflix did this on purpose, which really is, quite frankly, reprehensible, that they would do this to a woman who was never in the public eye and really didn't deserve this. This is not a situation where we have in New York where Donald Trump was sued by E. Jean Carroll, who lost for, I don't know how many, $78 million, whatever it was. But this is a situation where a woman sits in her home and she finds death threats and ridicule and shaming when she really had wanted nothing to do with this. So I think it actually plays very well to our case.
What do you think of Fiona as a human being?
I like Fiona. I think Fiona is she's vulnerable. I think she's very bright. I think she's very funny. I think she got caught up in this massive mess, which no one would ever have expected or wanted. But I do like her. I feel bad for her because normally what one does, whether it's the press or the media or streaming services, is you contact that person. You say, let me do a fact check. Is this true? Can I get a release? And this poor woman sitting in an apartment is afraid to leave. So I'm very it's very upsetting on a human level that they would make this kind of money. They put money over honesty here, and that's troublesome.
And they in their document, in their legal response to your lawsuit, they go heavy on her character.
Yeah,
they talk about hate speech, etc.
Very heavy, and it's interesting because they first start off by saying it's not Fiona. It's fictionalized. It's not about any one particular person. And then they spend 80% of their papers bashing her. I mean, bashing her. She's a stalker. She's this. She's a villain. She's that. And first of all, if it isn't her, then why are you bashing someone that it isn't? So that makes no sense. But why take shots at a woman? It's a second avenue of bashing her. They raise all kinds of things in their papers, which aren't even in the series. So I think maybe they figure if they can beat her down enough, she'll give up. And that's just not the case.
Should people care?
Yeah, they should. They should. It's no different than watching the news. If you see a story and it's told to be true, then it should be true. It really should be true. It should, if it's fictionalized, then say it's fictionalized. And the reason, what's upsetting the most is that the reason why they say this is a true story is because they know there will be far, far, far more viewers if you say it's true than if you say it's fictionalized. So what they've done is they've played both angles. They say it's true. They get all these revenues, and then when they're sued, they say, well, it's really not true. Well, they should have said that in the beginning, which would have reduced their revenues and not made the show as popular as it is. So people should care because of the company, a person is, your reputation's everything. You're a person of your word. And if you don't tell the truth, that's problematic, especially when you're a multi-billion-dollar streaming service and have such control over the media and the market.
I asked you what you thought of Fiona as a human being. What do you think of Richard Gadd as a human being?
So I don't know Richard Gadd. I am not sympathetic to him at all in the series. If you just watch the series, nothing else, I don't think he's a sympathetic person. I do believe that he's out for fame. He's out for glory. I mean, that's obvious. And it seems to me like he doesn't care either whether or not Fiona gets harmed. He's been on this tour in the U.S., at different places, just touting this wonderful show. And there's a victim here, and the victim is the person who's really the alleged antagonist of the show, who shouldn't be the antagonist. So I have a problem with Richard Gadd. When Richard Gadd shows scenes and writes scenes that this woman was convicted or raped, there's a rape scene in it, and none of it's true. I don't think much of Richard Gadd, but he's obviously put himself in the middle of this with his paper in connection with emotion. So I will be meeting and cross-examining Richard Gadd, and I'm excited to be doing so.
You're keen to basically get Gadd on the stand and take him apart?
I can't wait. I mean, I can't wait because it's very, there's been so much that's come out in the press. There was an article, I think it was in the Daily Mail, where Richard Gadd told Netflix not to write "This is a true story." If that's the case and Netflix did so, then it shows even more intent. So I can't wait to take Richard Gadd apart. Take him apart. That's not really fair. To cross-examine him, and I just want to do what Netflix should have done at the beginning. I want to get to the truth. I want to understand what really happened. Did they interview people to make them sound like Fiona? Benjamin King says in his letter to Parliament that it was based on a person. Richard Gadd says it wasn't. I just want the truth. And that's what Netflix should have wanted in the beginning.
You described this wonderful show. I wasn't sure if you were being serious about that. Do you think Baby Reindeer deserves the 11 Emmy nominations it received?
So the show itself is a good series, but it's terrible what it does to Fiona. If you watch it purely as a show, it is entertaining. It raptures you. It's very dark and it's very bothersome, but it just as a pure show, it does get your attention. But now that we know that it's not true and all the stuff that's come out really sours the show, it's not what it's represented to be. And that's the problem. So I would say cinematically, it could be a good show, but they blew it by doing what they've done.
What's the next step in terms of this case? What happens now?
So they've filed their motion. We'll put in our opposition papers. The judge will have a hearing, presumably in October, on whether or not the case gets tossed out. We are very confident it will not. After that, we will take discovery. We will have Richard Gadd's deposition. We will get documents from Netflix. Not only are we going to get documents which basically gets into the substance of the show with the edits and the changes and the hiring of the different actors, but we'll also get into Netflix's financial situation, because the money we're seeking here includes punitive damages, which are a function of how well Netflix, A, is doing generally, and B, is doing in this particular series. So we're going to get into some serious discovery after this motion is decided.
And if it does come to trial, and I guess that would depend on A, if it gets thrown out, B, if Netflix decide to settle. But if it does come to trial, will it be in front of a jury?
Yes, it will be in front of a jury in Los Angeles. And we probably would expect that to occur sometime a year from now, give or take. Could be less, could be more, depending on the court, depending on jurors, depending on the parties. But yes, it will be a jury trial, and we will be putting all of this information front and center. And let them say what they want about Fiona. The bottom line is they had no right doing to her what they did, and this should stop them from doing it again. I see this case as basically telling these services, if you're going to say something's true, you better get confirmation that it's true, or you better change that statement. Because you say it's true, it's worth a lot more money to your company, and it's wrong when you claim it to be true when it isn't.
Now, oh, sorry, hang on. We're at a certain time. We're at a certain time of the evening, so we'll do a cut there where the lights go out. We're obviously way ahead of you, Richard. I was going to ask you, earlier I mentioned the fact that they'd made certain criticisms and they had painted Fiona Harvey's character a certain way, rightly or wrongly. That won't be for me to say, it will be for the court to decide. How relevant is that? I mean, could they say, well, she said this, she did this, therefore she doesn't deserve the money that she's asking for?
Yeah, that'll be a fight. My argument is it isn't relevant. They throw everything into that motion, which quite frankly, I'm happy about, because now I see they show me their cards, but most of it isn't relevant. It's the things that happen outside of the four corners of those series are just not relevant. You can't say, well, she did it to someone else, therefore she did it. That's not the way the law works. The law works, did it happen in this series? And so they put a lot of information in there about Laura Ray. Laura Ray submits an affidavit, which has nothing whatsoever to do with it. And they do it just to disparage Fiona. So they disparage her in the public eye on TV, and now they disparage her in the court system. It's just more of the same. And quite frankly, none of that is relevant to whether or not they defamed her or they violated her right to privacy.
Have you, in your research, Richard, followed the path that the Record has taken in terms of uncovering certain facts about Baby Reindeer involving two Scottish protagonists?
Yeah, I mean, we have a lot of information, most of which I'm not going to give you here in the interview, but we have a lot of information. We are getting emails and communications from all kinds of sources who feel bad for Fiona, and we are looking at every one of them, and we are determining what else is false in the series. And the more we learn, the more we understand the falsities far outweigh any kind of truth to this story. So, yeah, I think Netflix has a big problem here. And the reason why they're hiring the big lawyers, the big guns, is because they know they have a big problem. So we'll see how this plays out. But I firmly believe that Netflix is going to have to right this wrong.
Have you seen a case like this before?
I haven't really seen something as egregious as this. I've seen a lot of defamation cases where things are said that are inappropriate, but this is very egregious. This is it's almost like Big Brother saying, we don't care. We're making a lot of money, so we're going to do what we want to do. So no, I'm not seeing something that as bad as this. And I'm hoping that it sends a message to the other streaming services that they should just do the right thing. Be responsible for your reporting. Be responsible for your stories. It's all we're asking. It's not that big of an ask.
Is Fiona Harvey, are you going to win this case?
Yeah. We're very confident in our position, especially now that we have their motion. The whole argument here is that it is a true story based on the series. Their motion comes back and says, well, really, it's not a true story. Well, it's not what you said when you made your $100 million. So, yes, we're very confident in this case.
Richard, thank you very much. It's a pleasure to speak with you today.
John, it's always a pleasure with you. Thank you.
Take care. All the best.
Bye-bye.
Bye.